Monsieur.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, Mr. Lorenzi. We're going to start our session. Thanks a lot for being with us. Education, all equal, really? So I will start with a quote. Einstein said, education is not about to learn facts, but to train the mind to think. Today, with our guests, we will have a round table, a panel discussion. Is it possible for the mind to think accessible? So I will introduce the different members. Yann Algan, co-moderator of the roundtable of the Cercle des Économistes. Yann, the best young economist in France in 2009. I'm aging, by the way, he said. And then he published a book that is still topical. I invite you to read this book, The Manufacture of Defiance, The Économie du Savoir-être, The Economy of Behaving. He's working on well-being, defiance, all these themes that we'll be elaborating on. We are really fortunate to have today Fawzia Koofi. She's Afghan. She is the president in exile in the UK, president of Women for Afghanistan, and Fawzia Koofi was the first woman who was the vice president of the Afghan parliament. So education is important. Access to education is important. It's complex in Afghanistan. Léon Lelouze, the head of the ESP Business Schools, 11,000 students across 6 countries, 6 universities. We will be talking about equalities, inequalities. Pierre-Olivier Costa, our guests from Marseille, the head of MUSEM. He has a daunting task at MUSEM. I like this museum. This is the Museum of Civilizations of Europe and the Mediterranean. So there are some initiatives that are being taken, and people who are prevented from attending museum. And then Christian Schmidt de la Blaise, an insurance company, 300,000 companies covered, 12 billion in terms of turnover, if I'm not mistaken. He will be elaborating on education, because in the insurance business there's an endowment fund for young people. So after Einstein's quote, let's have a look at the facts. Can the mind think? So, Yann, what about access to education? Over to you. Just a few elements, background elements, in order to introduce the different prominent speakers. Are all we equal? Are we all equal? Really? Education is one of the themes where the promise of equality is the most significant for all citizens and across the world, and for a simple reason. Since the centuries of enlightenment, we've placed a lot of hopes on education, the place of emancipation for citizens, for freedom, the place of economic emancipation, and to combat a society of order where individual trajectories were based on merit, on education. But this ideal, even though there have been a lot of progress, the academic rates have increased in the world, but this ideal of promise of equality has been shattered in the 21st century. And there are lots of inequalities in terms of access to education. can young women get access to education? And we'll be talking about Afghanistan. There are some financial inequalities, cultural inequalities, inequalities in terms of disabilities. All of these topics will be addressed. There's another point that is important to highlight, especially in France. In France, we are in a specific situation. We spend 5.6% of our GDP to education, but the system is the most unequal. If you look at the PISA surveys, especially if you look at the origin of the degrees of your parents. So what should we do? What can we do? We'll try to talk about solutions. Education is the investment of the 21st century. Lots of works have been done by economists. Mr. Ekman said that when you're invested in education of children, it will bring some benefits in terms of skills, in terms of economic development, in terms of citizenship, in terms of social cohesion in a country. And of course, we need to find how to invest these euros. For France, it's not a matter of spending only. And I will give my hunch. One of the most significant inequalities, you have gender inequalities, you have international inequalities, but you have inequalities in terms of socio-behavioral skills. You have lots of children, and this is the case of France, who think that the future is bad. There are some PISA surveys assessing the skills of children when they are 15 years of age in all the countries. France is within the average of countries in terms of academic performance in science, mathematics, or literature. But France is really lagging behind in terms of behavioral skills. If you ask French people, do you have confidence in yourself? Do you trust yourself? They will say no. Being good in maths, is it the product of chance or skills? People will tell you that is the result of chance, and this is something that is socially highlighted. How can we make sure that young people from underprivileged backgrounds, how can they succeed if they are under the impression that they are not good at maths? By essence, there are some solutions. It's important to work on those skills, but what is important is to look at policies that we'll be able to address as part of this panel discussion. Thanks a lot. The socio-behavioral skills are one of the keys. We will hand over to Faouzia Kofi. Equal access to education means getting access to education. That's not the case in Afghanistan for most women, for most young women. Faouzia, can you tell us about the situation in Afghanistan for young girls? And there are clandestine, illegal forms of education that are being implemented. Do they matter? Are they important? So maybe technological innovation can help. What is the situation like in your country?
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I'll be speaking in English, so I hope everybody will put the mic or understand what I say. Not yet in French, but hopefully soon, because I'm trying to improve my French skills. Although I have written 2 books in French, but still trying to improve my French skills. In terms of Afghanistan, yes, I represent Afghanistan, a country that the name is so familiar for all of us, but yet a country that the realities of life for people, especially for women and girls, is so far from the reality of where we live in this part of the world. Today, probably I will not be speaking in my best ways, not very optimistic, because you know, we are confronting many layers of challenge as being in exile as a politician and activist, because yesterday evening only we heard that the Russian government recognized Taliban as a government. How could they recognize a government that stands on the basis of apartheid and include in their curricula, they embrace suicide bombing They teach the students suicide bombing in the curricula, and they embrace that. I think today education is even more politicized and more unequal than any other times in our life. It's been politicized under the curricula, and this is the case in Afghanistan. Throughout the 5 decades of war and conflict, the first social sector that is being targeted by these radicalized groups is education. What is sad and painful is their actions are being justified and in some cases even supported by the global leaders, by the global north, I would say. I'm giving you an example. For instance, 4 decades ago when there was the Cold War, during the Cold War when Afghanistan was fighting, there were jihadi groups and mujahideen. They established madrasas, which are the religious schools. The curricula of those religious schools that were operating from Pakistan and Iran, but were for Afghan students in Afghanistan, were teaching basically radicalization. So in the curricula, they were like, 2 commanders fight, 8 people are killed. How many people are left? There was a weapon, a gun. On top of that was a flower, and it was like Jim Jihad. Jihad is holy. We all need to do jihad in our life. And you know what? Surprisingly, these books were published in Nebraska University in the United States. So Afghanistan and the countries like ours has always been a battlefield between the superpowers. We are being politicized for who we are, for where we located. And that politicization continued. In fact, I am a victim of that politicized policies. I was the first girl in my family to be allowed to go to school and to get education. My mother always wanted me to be a medical doctor to cure the pain of my nation. But when the Taliban first time came to power, they banned education for me. And together with me, millions of other girls were deprived. But when the Taliban were overthrown, we started the Back to School campaign, where we sent millions of girls and boys to school, because I believe that is the foundation of the society. I would have not been here today before you speaking about the pain of my people if I was not educated. There are many people in my country like me who desire to be here, but they cannot because they don't have the power, they don't have the means, and education is power. But these radicalized groups target that power very, very rightfully. So education was also politicized in the last 20 years when the international community, your sons and daughters were in Afghanistan. It was also a political means for power. It was very radicalized in a different way. So when the Taliban came, they again enforced their policies under the name of our religion, which has nothing to do with our religion. It is actually a means of power for these radicalized groups, including the Taliban, to brainwash our generations and to stay in power. Because they know that an educated woman, an educated mother, will never allow her son to pick up a gun and fight. She will rather allow her son to pick up a pen, or her daughter to pick up a pen and fight by writing, by science, by technology. So these radicalized groups know how to target that part. They ban education for girls. I was negotiating with the Taliban. Out of many hats that I wear, one of that hat was negotiation with the Taliban for 1 year in Doha, Qatar. I was part of the Republic team negotiating with the Taliban. And the Taliban lied to us. They said they will allow women to go to school. I still remember their words that they said women can get education up to PhD. And we were so naive in the world to believe them. And there were even some diplomats in the Western world, in the United States, and in other parts of the world, to say that, oh, Taliban have changed. Taliban are 2.0 now. We need to embrace that change. We need to allow them. They signed the deal with the Taliban, excluding the people of Afghanistan. Now the Taliban today deprive millions of girls from education. But what they do, they establish madrasas. So since the Taliban returned, 15,000 madrasas were established in Afghanistan, allowing girls to go to school, madrasa, with no age gap. So girls, any age can go to madrasa, but not to school. Why? because they know that a girl learning AI, a boy learning technology will be able to challenge Taliban's narrative. And the world is silenced because they think it's okay. It's a domestic issue.
Fauzia.
It's fundamental, I mean, to remind us of this situation. In a couple of minutes, is there a form of illegal education, a clandestine education in Afghanistan?
Très court, Fauzia, pour...
So be concise, be short.
We know how to find our ways. It's very painful for me to say, but we still do underground schools. We create online education for girls, and you know what? In this part of the world, we take education for granted, but in Afghanistan, girls walk 30 minutes to reach the top of a mountain, to have a good internet connection, to join an online class of English or any other language, or mathematics or science. We do underground schools for them because we don't want to lose a generation to these radicalization. We do nursing and midwifery classes for them because the Taliban also banned nursing and midwifery. So in 3 years' time, our medical system will be disrupted because there will be no further nurses and midwives. But we find our way. Not easy. My colleagues have been arrested because they teach. Teaching is now crime. So that is where we live in this world. Huge disparity. We need to ask the question to ourselves, how can we reduce this disparity? Why is education a means of power, a means of politicians getting into, using their own ideological, narrative?
Enfin, on pourrait écouter.
We could listen to Fauzia for a whole hour. Very important what you've said. So a shock of education, an education shock. When you were 8 years of age, you left Laos to flee the regime. When you were 8 years of age, you arrived in Europe. So there was a kind of educational shock. You were fully uprooted. So in higher education, you have Asia, Europe, the US. What is the situation like? Thanks a lot for giving me the floor. Equality-based education has to be shaped. As you've said, in Afghanistan, and I went to Afghanistan just after September the 11th. I went to Afghanistan in order to make sure that the law could be changed because the Taliban did things that were not democratic. Just to tell you that as part of my experience between Asia and Europe, I would say that I was struck. In maths, in calculation, I was 2 years in advance. I was good in maths, not because I was excellent, because I learned maths ahead of time, and I was 8 years of age. And in preparatory programs, we were 2 years ahead of France in terms of maths. In Asia, what is important is repetition, memorization. It's like martial arts. You have to repeat the moves, the gestures 1,000 times. But in France, what was important was reasoning, a step-by-step education. Of course, we want to awaken young children, adults. What are the basics? What are the fundamentals? And in the US, development, personal development, self-education. So the teacher is a coach in the United States, but in France, the teacher is an intellectual, a smart coordinator. In Asia, it's a matter of respecting the authority. In Asia, you don't challenge the authority. So the approaches are very different. They are concept-driven. All these approaches are different. How do you manage that in the ESCP in the different campuses. In France, it's about critical mind. In Germany, a theoretical approach. Do you adapt yourself? Of course we adapt ourselves. It's not a good way of being international, yes, but it's the same course under different angles. Hybridization is important. There should be different educational approaches. I mean, there is no such thing as an approach better than another. What is important is to make sure that we can reinforce our vision, and what matters is to sort out problems and issues. So we have an international approach. There are differences, but in France, inequalities boil down to social divides, and people can be far from education. There's a problem of funding as well. Young people told us that it's complex. How can we get access to education? Pierre-Olivier Costa, you are the head of MUSEM in Marseille, the Museum of Civilizations. So you've drawn a parallel between culture and education, and you've said that there are some people who are prevented from going to museums. So you've launched many actions, and we can reduce those cultural divides. How? Thanks a lot for inviting me, by the way. Indeed, I'm fortunate because I'm the head of the youngest national museums in France, and it's atypical national museum because we collect objects of daily life, objects in the households of people. So these objects are accessible. So we will be using those objects in order to reach out to different people. The issue of equality is an obligation. We shouldn't leave people aside. So we will be targeted people who are far from culture, people who cannot visit our museum. So we will build bridges so that they can visit us. The bridge between education and culture, it is clear, it is well documented, it dates from a few years. So we are atypical. We have a lot of leeway versus other national museums. Instead of putting culture, artistic education in schools, we decided to put the school into the museum. We are the first museum to undergo this experiment dating October 2024. We created a classroom. We closed an exhibition room in order to open a classroom with 12 pupils and who were left out, and they didn't go to school for the past 2 years. So we hoped that the museums could help them to get back to school. And what is the impact of that? We have to be cautious. It's important to document this type of experiment. It is unprecedented. Out of the 12 pupils who integrated our structure, they managed to get back to school. 10 managed to get back to school. So we are very happy of this experiment, i.e. culture is a solution to societal problems and issues. So Jan will take stock of our discussions. Christian Schmidt de la Brélie, you are the head of Clésia, an insurance company. Why are you here? That's very interesting, in fact. Your presence is of great interest. Regarding access to education, to education for disabled people, you've just founded, or you've just launched, rather, an endowment fund.
Yes, Elizabeth. Hello, everybody. In fact, I'm in charge of a social welfare group based on equality. Equality, thanks to the way the employees are organized, and we are there to protect people. So that thinking in the business world, many companies are looking for skilled people, and they're looking for engaged entrepreneurs. and they are looking to take on people with disabilities, and it's very difficult. And so it's clear many things have been done since 2017, let's say. Notably, the President of the Republic wanted to create a wow effect for providing people with support through to A-levels, with helpers and supporting people for disabled young people. But at the end of, A-levels, we noticed two things. So there was a self-censorship logic followed by parents. So, my children can't go any further. And then there were lots of other difficulties. Not everybody is the daughter or son of people who have been through higher education, and so they don't necessarily have the opening that they might need. So behind that obstacle in terms of careers, there's the question of ability. In certain schools where there are foundation courses, you can't get in if you're in a wheelchair. And the second subject in higher education, it's important to provide support to these young people because their financial abilities are not necessarily different from those of somebody who is not disabled. So you've got to find specific solutions. Each disability is a specific case, so the inequality has to be compensated for differently. That's right. So the initiatives have been taken, thinking has been implemented about who we are as a company. And based on all of that, a fund was created. We refer to it as HandiPass for Excellence. It's how to allow people to go the last mile. Now, obviously, immediately, we're not going to create Stephen Hawkings and put them in all companies. But the idea is to create a situation so that proportionally, somebody who is disabled and who is academically bright, because I'm not talking about cognitive disabilities, but proportionally, somebody who has a disability, but who has full intellectual capacity, well, that person has 15 times less chance of going to a major university. And are the obstacles financial or, well, the obstacles? First of all, the families have to be more open-minded. They have to be made aware of the problems, and that's of the opportunities. Sorry, and that's what the endowment fund is for. The second subject is, after A-levels, the families need to be supported through the fund. The third idea is to shake up regions as well. Those who own the different schools, so that disabled young people can go through to higher education. Perhaps I could talk to the general manager of the ESCP. But the barrier, once they've got over that barrier, schools are quite ready to welcome them. There's a young person who's at Centrale Supélec, and who went through 2 years of hospital residence, and is in fact a year ahead of their time. And that's because their family made that possible. What about the financial question, though? The endowment fund, does it help financially? Yes, we've provided a certain number of grants. So the fund, well, we ask companies through the fund, and there are many engaged entrepreneurs, we ask them to help us with financing. So you launch a call for funds or donations. Yes. Now, some companies want to take on disabled people, and sometimes once people go through higher education, they have lots of ability. They have been made warriors, so to speak, and they're just as You know, they've got a fighting spirit like anybody without a disability. So we've seen solutions. You were talking about social and behavioral skills. So if we go back to the first two-thirds of the roundtable discussion, how can we reduce the divides? It wasn't on the list of questions, but it's a good question to ask. Yes, there are multiple prospects. What strikes me, first and foremost, listening to you, it's the multiplication of initiatives outside of national education structures with associations, parents' associations, museum associations, university associations. You know, it's important to build alongside, to compensate a national education system that's finding it difficult to keep its head above water with 1 million students. So that means that public policies are not working. Well, yes, they've come to a standstill. They're trying to make progress, but as we can see, for several years, you know, there have been so many different ministers of education over the past few years. If I was a minister, I love that kind of idea. Yes, if I was a minister, there would be two priorities. The first is the question of accessing scientific culture, mathematics. I know it's a concern. Let me give you the figures that are worrying. So there are surveys called TIMSS. These are specific surveys focusing on science and maths skills among young children in all OECD countries. This can be measured at different stages. So between 2000 and 2020, France went from 6th place to 17th place out of 18 countries audited. So there really was a big decline. Yes, and a decline at all levels. You've got a big group of young people who no longer understand scientific culture. But then there's the mythology of the French engineers who go to the big schools, the big universities. But even that number is going down. So also it's very gendered. And this brings me to the second part of what I wanted to say about priorities. You know, if you're convinced that you're bad at maths and it's just in your genes, it's like asking a child to learn to swim by getting them to jump in and then they go to the bottom of the pool. Now, there are experiments being carried out, and the Ministry of Education is carrying out an experiment in Versailles, Paris, Poitiers. The idea is to train teachers as well. Of course, you've got to develop things that gravitate around the system, but it's important to train teachers. Train them by showing them a video that shows the brain like a muscle. It isn't a muscle, but it operates like a muscle. And as you train that muscle, you can see that the neurons develop and connect. So intelligence is grown. So just by seeing that video, things change in their mind. It doesn't cost that much. And then they say, oh, okay, all right, I'll give them homework and I'll do the homework, etc. So the third part of the roundtable now, I've qualified these inequalities in terms of the brain as invisible. Let me explain what I mean. In a world where learning to learn is vital, so I'll give you the floor in just a moment, Mr. Brenier. Everything is accelerating. What we learned a year ago might not be true in 3 years' time. In a world where things are speeding up, we don't all have the same way of learning. And this is what Léon was saying. How do we, work on each person's way of learning? There are technological developments. There are educational developments. They can maybe help. Can they help? I think you can tell us from the point of view of the ESCP Business School and private education, higher education. What do you do? I think there are some interesting things that we can explore here. I think that in this world that is undergoing technological transformation with AI, with the climate crisis, It's about learning to learn. Yes, that is the methodology that's important. You've got to learn lasting skills that are going to last for 30, 40 years. So these lasting skills, it's learning to learn, learning to not to de-learn. So what can AI do? What will we not be able to do? And what will AI not be able to do with respect to us? AI is going to be better than us when it comes to memorized learning, everything that's rational. It's clear that AI is already better than us. Now, the second step is anchored learning. This is what Jan was saying. If I know how to swim, well, 10 years later, I'll still know how to swim because I had the repetition of the swimming movements when I was young. The last step, and that is what AI can't do, and what human beings can do, and what our schools can do, that is what I refer to as embodied learning on site, because AI can't do that. And that's why we're working on that. AI can't do that. It's illogical. It's not conventional. So above all, it's important to learn beyond socio and behavioral skills, so soft skills. So I call that, I add mad skills. You know, learn about your mad skills. Everybody has atypical skills that you're absolutely mad about. Give me some examples. Well, let's give an example. My mad skill is learning to learn, learning to unlearn. I love reading. That's a skill, that's a mad skill. Now, there are perhaps people who are focused on resilience or cooking. And thanks to that, once you identify what it is, your mad skill, that's atypical, the thing that you're passionate about. So I thought that was very interesting what you said. So you were talked about interviews for the foundations course. So you're saying that what you do alongside cooking, writing a book, reading a book, so that's something that can become the center of your life. So you go into business school, you go into higher education, you do your initial training, but your passion, you're talking about mad skills, and I like that idea, but your passion, you focus on it now, not later on when you're going to be suffering from burnout. Yes, let's take a young person who's got into the school, who loves pastry, making pastries, and so he might then do training to become a pastry chef and open 20 or so pastry shops. So he focused on the mad skills and has the business acumen because he went to business school. So I've been in France for 49 years. In fact, it's important to encourage people rather than discourage people. And it's what Jan was saying. We've got this elitist culture. A little bit of privilege takes you a long way. But we need excellence for everybody. Everybody can get there. I talked with Olivier Blanchard, the person in charge of the economics at the IMF, and I said I was good at maths, and I said that when I did my A-levels, I was not very good. So when you discover expertise, well, it can be later on in life. So I think it's really about encouraging, not discouraging children to learn to learn. We're talking about inequalities. They mustn't be generated. We must make sure that they're not. And there are lots of different levels of inequalities, so it's important to reduce them, correct them, remove them. You'll be able to react in just a moment. Let's go back to AI. You're suggesting, you propose to your students a conversational agenda. Tell us about that. It's pretty subtle. Well, for us, AI, it's just a tool. It's not an end in itself. So we work with OpenAI, our world partner, to create a personalized tool, a personal agent, not an agenda, so that it's for all pupils and all teachers, so that they can acquire knowledge and skills in a personalized manner. So they work with their virtual agent. The agent works like a coach, and their critical approach can be improved. And there's a toing and froing, if you like. The agent helps people to learn faster and to sharpen their intelligence. So I don't really understand this notion. So if there's something I don't understand, I ask my agent and I say, okay, you know who I am, you know what my reactions are, explain to me this notion differently and simply. Yes, I'm sorry to say it this way, in France, we have extraordinary reasoning when it comes to criticism and demonstration. I say so, therefore, but, and so it's a thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So not everybody operates in that way. You see, I'm saying therefore again. Therefore, that's a very French approach. We never say therefore in the United States. So that's why each person has a way of understanding and perceiving knowledge and skills. And that's why, thanks to AI, we can go further and we can reach excellence for all. So we'll take questions from the room, but just before that, one more thing. So let me know if you have questions. But first of all, what about reactions from our speakers? And Jan, I'm going to ask you a trick question, or maybe not a trick question. So I understand the situation of these young people, people who don't necessarily have abilities, and they use these technological tools as tools, and really as tools. And there's a level of maturity, they've got a certain amount of resilience. And we were talking about this earlier on. So, and we're talking more from the point of view of engineers than literary experts. So we've talked about AI, self-driving cars, but we have the opportunity to push these young people who are barred from higher education. We can provide them with education. And Christelle Lansat is in charge of the pharmaceutical industry, and there's a network animated by a serial entrepreneur who is in charge of the Marcillac Jazz Festival, who created a company. It's one of the biggest employers of people in a situation of disability. Why? Because he spent 9 years in a wheelchair. So it's this percentage of people that need to work for the others. So, Pierre-Olivier, I know you want to react. So your exhibition on travelers in the Museum, I was fascinated. In an hour of exhibition on the Rome people, I learned more than in a book, because you'd managed to pass on knowledge with 5 different types of support. I realized that my connectivity picked it up automatically. Is that one of the solutions? Yes, one of the solutions for fighting against inequality is to look at what we all have in common and to use that. In museums, there are people who are highly erudite, who've been to the Louvre School, who are interested, curious, they've read reviews, and there are some people who aren't like that. But we all have something in common, a panel of emotions. I don't know any emotion relating to artificial intelligence, but you know that emotion is shared by everybody. So when you go into the exhibition, so there's one that's opening on the 9th of July, it's about reading the sky. It's about the starry skies in the Mediterranean. So there are lots of books that can be read then. Yes, you can go to the exhibition as well, though. So you get in through emotions, a sharing at human beings' levels. So it's a popular traditions. So there's a focus on popular traditions. When we thought about the objective of the museum, we wanted something for the ordinary people. So you go into the exhibition, you meet somebody who talks to you about their life, and there's a lot of emotion that is shared. So it's a way of showing inequality. And this will take me back to my last question before I open the floor. And so if we talk about figures, 3% of GDP for average school performance, what efficacy are we talking about? You talked about training teachers. We're talking about doing things at a human being level in a world that is restricted in terms of public finance. Is the solution to say to our teachers at all levels, let's take that emotion, let's take those mad skills, and let's take education outside of school? Yes, just very quickly, and then we can give the floor to the public. One of the big problems in France, but not just in France, everywhere, is really the training of our teachers. We're seeing this, it's an observation that's been validated. So they're very much focused on academic aspects, not on the active teaching itself. And in the active teaching, you know, there's a way in which you have to treat children from the point of view of their emotions relating to learning. Teachers themselves in France, they say that they're not prepared properly to pass on knowledge. So it's time to change that. Let's try and change things then with solutions. Do you have any questions in the audience? There are some microphones going around. I don't know who's giving them out, but we've got some questions. So we've got 6 minutes for questions. Can I ask you to introduce yourself, a short question, and then we'll give some answers. Lots of questions I can see. Thank you. Naima Koshti. I work in a humanitarian sector. I'm a mediator for preventing conflicts in Africa. It's very hot. I'd like to understand another risk that's going to widen the gap of inequalities between girls and boys, and that is crises. I work on Africa. There was the COVID crisis. School stopped. Lots of children weren't able to follow online courses. There was no internet, notably in rural areas. So there were people who took initiatives, but lots of school pupils dropped out, especially young girls. And, you know, when there are more household chores, it's girls that are involved. I've just come back from a mission in Madagascar. So island countries are the most impacted by climate change. And when there's a cyclone and the school is destroyed, there are very few girls who actually go back to school because they drop out. They have to help their parents. They have to get married early. So we're not seeing these things in developed countries. We're seeing them in the global south, especially with the climate change and the health crisis that may be generated again. These exacerbate inequalities in developed and non-developing countries. But, you know, then we have the ideological problems like those in Afghanistan, where young women are not allowed to go to school. Thank you. That's not really a question. It's more of an observation. Would our speakers like to react? No? Okay, let's have another question. Thank you for giving me the floor. Morgane Urias. I'm an apprentice and consultant for recruitment. I come from a family of farmers. I was lucky to be allowed to go to several good business schools. But when I look at the expense of schooling and accommodation, I thought, well, what's the point of all of that when I can't reach my goal because of financing? So have we really democratized things if people have to remain in front of the door because of financial problems? Let me answer that. I said yes to ESCP, the financial barrier should not be a barrier. We have a word for equal opportunities, and that is IDEM. IDEM is an acronym that means inclusion, diversity, excellence, and merit. If you manage to pass the exam, come and see me, because in 2021 in the school we've set up free schooling for the first 3 years. So no school fees. For the other years, we give a discount. Why? Well, did you know that in big business schools, at the ESCP, we have no state subsidies, not a single euro. So how do we finance? There's no secret. Does excellence come at a cost? Does it come at a price? Yes. It's thanks to the foundation, but also if a school, even, well, at the ESCP, if you succeed with the competition, we don't want to do any positive action. We don't provide bonuses. That's not. If you succeed just like the others, then you come to the school and we will set up the right kind of financing. So that's Léon's answer. It's from the private sector, but your question is the real question. I know that there are some things, and this is where innovation in higher education and in the field of public policies can help. We're not going far enough. I've always said that we could have a win-win situation. Yes, you can't live, but why not have a company financing you, taking out a wager on you, and then you promise to stay with the company 3 or 4 years afterwards? So it's a good question. I don't think we're innovating enough, and that's my personal opinion. I just wanted to share that with you. Another question? We've got 1 minute left. 1 minute. Hello? Very, very quickly, please. So I arrived in the middle of the discussion, but I have the impression that you focused a lot on intellectual stimulation, the method for learning, and I wondered, do you tie this up with IQ? Is there an impact between inquisitiveness and intellectual stimulation and IQ, or not?
En fait, ce que vous dites là,
what you're saying is that, well, our conviction is that intelligence is plural. It's not just founded on all things that are rational or logic. It's important. You need to be rational. You need to have logic. We were talking about emotional intelligence, the intelligence to read situations, intercultural intelligence, relational intelligence. There are all these forms of intelligence, and curiosity, inquisitiveness is an essential intelligence. It's important to observe. It's important to listen to people. It's a rare skill. So perhaps one last question, and that will bring us to the end, but let's just take it. I have a young girl where she will start her higher education studies soon. We're beginning to look at things. What we're seeing, though, is that the expenses are over 15,000 euros a year. So we can't talk about equality. So even when 2 parents work, how can you pay for that? How much does your school cost? If you don't come out of a big business school or university, there's no follow-on. We're not equal because we don't have an equal economic system for helping the underprivileged, whether we're talking about mid-schools or high schools. We will never be equal. Now, we don't just have a private answer. There is higher education, and there are cases where things are not expensive. But of course, you have to be able to live at the same time. It is a big subject. We could have had a whole round table on that. Perhaps we can talk about the price, because, you have to call a spade, and then we'll finish. So with respect to the price, for the post-bac program, it's 15,000 euros, but we've set up grants. But you're right. All higher education in France is excellent at university, but also in the major engineering schools or business schools. So we mustn't say that it's not because I didn't do this school that there's no follow-on. No, that can't be true. Fazia, very quickly, because we are live. One last word, if that's okay, very quickly.
Question of inclusion. We all have a responsibility to ask our policymakers and ourselves on how much of our GDP actually is invested on education. Education is not a luxury. It's a fundamental right. But if you compare it to the fact that how much of the money is going to weaponization and companies and factories that produces guns, as opposed to how much of our GDP goes to education, then you will see the differences and the discrepancies. It is the fundamental rights of every human beings, and you in the global north have the responsibility to protect that. I think multilateralism is coming under attack, and it's our global responsibility to protect that, be it in Afghanistan or anywhere else, because in Afghanistan, with innovation in education, also the society perspective have changed. When I was a little child, my father didn't allow me to go to school, but when I was an MP, many fathers came to me asking for school for their girls. So that is a societal change. But now the Taliban don't allow the girls to go to school. What would be Afghanistan look in 10 years' time? What is your responsibility to ensure that rights are preserved? It's not a luxury, it's a right for everybody.
Très belle conclusion.
That's a great conclusion. And in the bookshop, there is this lovely book, and Fawzia will be signing it this afternoon. Thank you, and we could have gone on for many, many hours still.